The scream tore through the morning air, a sound I hadn't heard from my wife, Sarah, in years, not since we lost our first calf to a sudden blizzard. I dropped the wrench I was using to fix the fence gate, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and sprinted towards the south pasture. The crisp morning chill did little to cool the sudden, icy dread that snaked its way through my gut. Every step was heavy, each breath a sharp intake of fear. What could possibly make Sarah, a woman who faced down thunderstorms and calving emergencies with unwavering resolve, utter such a guttural cry of pure anguish? As I burst over the rise, the sight that greeted me froze me in my tracks. There, lying perfectly still in the dew-kissed grass, was Hercules, my magnificent Charolais bull. His colossal white coat, usually gleaming under the morning sun, was now stained crimson in a spreading pool that darkened the vibrant green. A jagged, dark hole marred his otherwise perfect hide, right behind his massive shoulder. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands trembling as they gently stroked his head, her face streaked with tears. She didn't look up, just repeated, over and over, in a voice barely a whisper, "He's gone, David. He's really gone." The words echoed in the vast emptiness of the pasture, each syllable twisting a knife in my chest. Hercules. My $50,000 bull. Gone. But how? And more importantly, who would dare do such a thing? Who would invade our sanctuary, our home, and commit such a senseless act of violence against an innocent creature? As I numbly stumbled forward, my eyes, blurred by unshed tears, scanned the ground around Hercules. And then I saw it, etched clearly into the soft, muddy earth near his massive, lifeless head, a distinct boot print. It was deep, with a coarse, unfamiliar tread, certainly not one of my ranch hands' boots, nor any I recognized from the few hunters who ever sought permission to cross our land. Right next to it, startlingly out of place, was another print. Smaller, more refined, almost dainty, its outline was crisp and pristine, as if the wearer had stepped carefully to avoid the mud's grasp. It was undeniably a woman's shoe, a polished, city slicker type of shoe, utterly alien to the rugged terrain of a cattle ranch. My jaw tightened. This wasn't some tragic accident, no stray bullet from a distant hunter. This was an invasion. This was personal. This was a calculated act. But who? And why? The answers, I knew, would lead us down a path we never imagined, a path paved with petty rules, simmering resentment, and a shocking disregard for the lives we built here. To understand how we arrived at that devastating morning, with Hercules, the very heart of our ranch, lying dead in the pasture, we have to go back. Way back. Back to a time when our lives on the Triple Creek Ranch were simpler, when our biggest worry was whether the spring rains would come on time, ensuring a good hay harvest, not whether our property was safe from the overzealous dictates of a homeowners association and their unexpected, utterly unwelcome guests. My name is David, and for as long as I can remember, the Triple Creek Ranch has been my world. It's not just land, it's a living, breathing entity, shaped by generations of my family. My great-grandparents settled here over 100 years ago, carving a life out of the rugged landscape, raising cattle and growing crops. The ranch taught me everything. Patience from waiting for a calf to stand, perseverance from fixing fences in a downpour, and the profound interconnectedness of life from the cycle of the seasons. It wasn't always easy. There were droughts that withered the crops, blizzards that trapped us indoors, and market crashes that threatened to take everything. But through it all, the land endured, and so did we. We learned to be resilient, to value hard work, and most importantly, to help our neighbors, because out here, we were all we had. Sarah, my wife, came into this world like a burst of sunshine, straight from the city, but with a spirit that embraced the ranch life more fiercely than anyone I'd ever known. She arrived as a young veterinarian, fresh out of school, assigned to our rural county. I remember the first time she drove her sleek, city car, sparkling clean, down our dusty gravel road. She looked so out of place, but her eyes, bright and curious, took everything in. We hit it off immediately, bonded by a shared love for animals and an unspoken understanding of the quiet beauty of a life lived close to the earth. She learned to ride, to mend fences, even to call the cattle. She brought a gentle touch to our rough-and-tumble existence, teaching us that kindness wasn't just for people, but for every creature, every plant, every blade of grass on our land. We were a team, building a life together, pouring our hearts and souls into the Triple Creek Ranch. Hercules was a testament to that shared vision. He wasn't just a bull, he was a symbol of our comeback. Years ago, a particularly harsh winter had decimated a large portion of our herd. We were heartbroken, nearly ready to give up. But Sarah found a small, sickly Charolais calf at a sale, abandoned and weak. Everyone told us he wouldn't make it. But Sarah, with her incredible empathy and relentless determination, nursed him back to health. She spent countless nights in the barn, wrapped him in blankets, fed him by hand, even sang him lullabies. I watched her, amazed, as this tiny, fragile creature slowly transformed. He grew into the most magnificent bull I had ever seen, strong, gentle, with an almost luminous white coat and eyes that seemed to hold deep wisdom. He was a champion, winning ribbons at local fairs, and his calves were sought after by ranchers across the state. He wasn't just worth $50,000 in market value, he was priceless to us, a living embodiment of hope, resilience, and Sarah's boundless capacity for kindness. For generations, the Triple Creek Ranch stood as a proud, independent landmark in our county. Our closest neighbors were farmers or other ranchers, people who understood the rhythm of the land and the need for space. We had a handshake agreement with everyone: respect each other's land, help when needed, and stay out of each other's way unless invited. It was a simple, honest life. Then, about 5 years ago, things began to change. A huge property development company bought up thousands of acres of land adjacent to ours, land that had been open fields and a sleepy timber forest. They built a massive, planned community, rows upon rows of identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns, a golf course, and worst of all, a homeowners association. We watched, a little bewildered, as new families, mostly from big cities, moved in. They were different. They craved order, pristine appearances, and rules for everything. We lived by the land's rules, they lived by bylaws. At first, it was just a minor annoyance. We'd get letters about dust from our gravel road settling on their cars, a ranch road, mind you, in a rural area. Or complaints about the smell of cow manure, a natural part of ranching. Sarah and I tried to be understanding, explaining the realities of our working ranch, offering apologies where appropriate, and even installing more windbreaks. Most of the new residents were polite enough, a little naive perhaps, but generally seemed open to understanding. They even brought their kids by sometimes to see the calves, and Sarah, with her incredible patience, would spend hours teaching them about farm life, sharing the simple joys of watching a chick hatch or a lamb frolic. It felt like we were slowly, gently, bridging the gap between two very different worlds. But then Patricia Jenkins moved in. She was a different breed entirely. Patricia, a woman who seemed to have an opinion on everything and a solution for problems no one else knew existed, quickly became the reigning queen of the Willow Creek HOA board. She arrived in a custom-designed SUV that probably cost more than our tractor, with a tiny, yapping dog that seemed perpetually annoyed at the world. Patricia immediately started campaigning for stricter rules, demanding uniformity and property values be prioritized above all else. She had a way of speaking, a tone of voice that was both sugary sweet and razor-sharp, leaving no room for disagreement. She never raised her voice, but her words had a chilling, cutting edge that made people shrink. She seemed to thrive on control, on making sure everyone followed her vision of what the community should be. Our first real clash with Patricia came over our fence. It was an old, sturdy, well-maintained wooden fence that had kept our cattle safely contained for decades. But Patricia deemed it too rustic and not aesthetically pleasing for the new community. She sent us a formal HOA notice demanding we replace it with a white vinyl fence, like all the other houses. I stared at the letter, dumbfounded. A white vinyl fence for a working cattle ranch? It would be torn down in a week by a playful calf. "This is absurd, David," Sarah said, her voice tight with disbelief as she read the notice. "It's a ranch. Our fence is functional. It's part of the landscape. It's 100 years old." "I know, honey," I replied, rubbing my temples. "But she's dug her heels in." I tried to explain it to her at the last HOA meeting. She just smiled that unsettling smile and said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Hayes. We must maintain property values for everyone. Like our land wasn't valuable. We fought it, of course. We attended every HOA meeting, presented historical documents, brought photos of our fence with the cattle peacefully grazing behind it. We even got a few of the older, more reasonable residents to speak up for us, people who remembered a time before the HOA, when common sense prevailed. Mr. Henderson, a kind old man who had lived across the way for 50 years, stood up and said, "That fence has been there longer than this whole development. It ain't bothering nobody. What's next, telling Mr. Hayes he can't have cows on his cow ranch?" A few chuckles rippled through the room, but Patricia just narrowed her eyes. Patricia, however, was relentless. She cited bylaws, architectural guidelines, and even brought in a landscape architect from the city to give a presentation on harmonious community aesthetics. She spun a narrative that our ranch, in its unpolished state, was dragging down their property values, a sentiment that started to take root among some of the newer, more impressionable residents who had invested heavily in their suburban dream homes. We found ourselves constantly defending our way of life, something we had never imagined we'd have to do on our own land. It was during this fence dispute that we discovered the growing divide within the community. Some neighbors, like the young couple, the Millers, who had just moved in down the road, genuinely sympathized. They'd often stop by with their 2 small children, fascinated by the cows and the horses. Mrs. Miller once brought us a homemade apple pie, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "It's so wonderful what you two do here," she'd said. "It feels real, you know. Not like all these cookie-cutter houses." Those moments were like a warm breeze on a hot day, reminding us that not everyone was blinded by Patricia's rigid vision. We'd often see their kids, little Owen and Lily, peering through the fence, waving shyly at Hercules or the calves. Sarah would always wave back, her face softening into a warm smile. She truly believed in building bridges, in showing people the heart behind our ranch. But then there were others, swayed by Patricia's persistent rhetoric. They started giving us cold shoulders, or looking away when we drove past. It hurt. We had always been part of this community, contributing to its fabric, even before it had a formal name. Now, we were outsiders in our own home, targeted by an organization meant to foster community spirit. The fence issue eventually reached a stalemate. We refused to replace it, citing the impracticality and the historical significance. Patricia couldn't legally force us, as our ranch predated the HOA's existence and our property was largely excluded from some of their more stringent rules, thanks to some foresight in the original property deeds. But she didn't give up. She shifted tactics. The low period after the fence battle was a deceptive calm. Patricia seemed to back off, focusing her energy on other, smaller infractions within the community, cracking down on overgrown rose bushes or unapproved garden gnomes. We breathed a sigh of relief, thinking perhaps she had finally understood, or at least accepted, that a working ranch could not be governed by suburban bylaws. We spent more time simply enjoying our land, the quiet rhythm of cattle grazing, the peaceful rustle of wind through the cottonwood trees. Sarah and I even started planning a small community event, a harvest festival, on the ranch, inviting local farmers and artisans, hoping to foster a sense of connection that Patricia's HOA seemed determined to stamp out. We believed that by showing genuine kindness and extending an open hand, we could break down the walls of misunderstanding. It was a time of hopeful rebuilding, of reminding ourselves what truly mattered: connection, community, and the timeless bond with the land. But Patricia Jenkins was not a woman who forgot or forgave. She merely re-strategized. Her quiet period was, in hindsight, merely the calm before a much bigger storm. She was watching, waiting, observing our daily routines, our vulnerabilities. She was collecting information, not for a peaceful resolution, but for a tactical strike. The shift began subtly, with a new rule proposed at a seemingly innocuous HOA meeting. It was titled Visitor Access and Property Integrity. On the surface, it sounded harmless, a rule about ensuring visitors to the community were known and approved, supposedly for security reasons. It required residents to register any long-term guests and to ensure all visitors adhered to community rules. It even included a clause about unauthorized vehicles and trespassing. Most residents, focused on their own affairs, didn't pay much attention, waving it through with little discussion. They thought it was about preventing random solicitors or ensuring neighborhood safety. We, however, felt a prickle of unease. Our ranch was a working environment, with feed trucks, vets, and occasional contractors. The rule seemed to cast a wide net. My instincts screamed that something was off, but Sarah, ever the optimist, tried to reassure me. "It's probably just standard boilerplate, David," she'd said, though a flicker of worry crossed her own face. "They can't possibly intend it for us. We're a commercial operation." Little did we know, the Visitor Access and Property Integrity rule was a carefully crafted Trojan horse, designed specifically to target us. Patricia began to use it as leverage, sending increasingly aggressive notices. Not about our fence this time, but about unauthorized vehicles on our gravel road that led to our property, vehicles that were delivering feed or picking up calves. Then came complaints about our unfenced perimeter, the entire ranch border, which was ludicrous, allowing unmonitored access. Each notice was delivered with cold precision, escalating the pressure. The final, most chilling development came in the form of a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by Patricia Jenkins as president. It cited the Visitor Access and Property Integrity rule and stated, unequivocally, that due to repeated breaches of security and unapproved access, the HOA would be implementing random compliance checks on all properties, including peripheral areas, to ensure adherence to the new visitor policy. It also mentioned a new Community Watch initiative that would involve patrols by HOA-appointed volunteers. The letter ended with a thinly veiled threat: failure to comply will result in significant fines and legal action. I crumpled the letter in my hand, my breath catching in my throat. Random compliance checks? Patrolling our ranch? My grandfather would have laughed them off the property with a shotgun and a stern warning. But this wasn't his era. This was a new kind of battle, fought with paper and bylaws, wielded by someone who clearly had no respect for boundaries, either physical or personal. It was an extreme invasion of privacy, a blatant disregard for our property rights, and a terrifying escalation of Patricia's relentless campaign against us. The very thought of strangers, uninvited and unannounced, roaming our private land, examining our operations, sent a shiver down my spine. We knew then that the peace was over. The battle for the Triple Creek Ranch, and our very way of life, had just begun. And little did we know how deadly serious this battle was about to become, culminating in the horrific scene that greeted us that quiet, dew-kissed morning in the South pasture. The chilling threat of random compliance checks from Patricia Jenkins and her HOA weighed heavily on our minds. Sarah and I spent days discussing it, our usual light-hearted evening conversations replaced with worried whispers about our rights and how to protect our land. We consulted with our lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Brenda who had handled rural property disputes for years. She confirmed our fears. While the HOA had limited jurisdiction over our working ranch, Patricia was clearly pushing the boundaries, trying to find loopholes to assert control. The concept of random compliance checks on private property, especially a functioning agricultural business, was legally shaky at best, but the thought of confrontation, of strangers deliberately walking onto our land uninvited, filled us with dread. It wasn't just an invasion of privacy, it felt like a violation of our very sense of home. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife, and even the cattle seemed to sense our unease, their usual calm grazing occasionally interrupted by nervous flicks of their tails. One crisp autumn morning, a few weeks after receiving the ominous letter, I was out mending a section of fence along the eastern perimeter, near the new housing development. It was a tedious but necessary task, replacing weathered posts and restringing barbed wire. The sun was warm on my back, and the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant bleating of sheep, the chirping of crickets, usually brought me a deep sense of peace. But today, the peace was fractured. Every creak of the trees, every rustle in the undergrowth, made me glance up, my hand instinctively tightening on my tools. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and high-pitched, cut through the quiet. "Excuse me. Are you Mr. Hayes?" I straightened up, turning to see Patricia Jenkins standing on the other side of the fence, not on our property, but on the communal green space that bordered it. She wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall, burly man with a clipboard, dressed in a crisp, clean polo shirt that looked completely out of place in the dusty ranch environment. He had a stern, unsmiling face. They both looked utterly alien against the backdrop of our sprawling, earthy ranch. "That's me," I replied, my voice calm despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. "Can I help you, Ms. Jenkins?" Patricia smiled, a tight, unconvincing stretch of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Hayes. We're conducting one of our routine community watch patrols. As per the new visitor access policy, we're just ensuring that all boundaries are secure and that there are no unauthorized entries or activities." She gestured vaguely towards our property with a manicured hand. The man beside her scribbled something on his clipboard, his gaze sweeping over our land, a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. It was a look of assessment, of judgment, and it made my skin crawl. "Unauthorized entries?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Ms. Jenkins, this is private property. A working ranch. There are no unauthorized entries here. Our land is clearly marked." "Yes, well," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we've received a few anonymous concerns about your large animals and the general accessibility of your vast property. It's for the safety of our residents, you understand." Her eyes flickered towards the fence line, then back to me, a knowing look. "We just want to make sure everyone is secure. Especially with such valuable livestock wandering about." The implied threat was clear. She wasn't just observing. She was probing, looking for a way in. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. "My animals are perfectly secure. And if you have any concerns about safety, you should address them through proper channels, not by patrolling our borders." I pointedly looked at the man with the clipboard. "And certainly not by implying we're somehow a threat." Patricia's smile tightened further. "Just doing our due diligence, Mr. Hayes. We are simply ensuring compliance with HOA regulations for the entire community's well-being." She then turned on her heel, the man with the clipboard following silently, making more notes. They walked slowly along our fence line, their backs to me, their figures becoming smaller against the vast expanse of my land. I stood there, watching them until they disappeared from view, a cold knot of anger and frustration twisting in my stomach. This was just the beginning. When I told Sarah about the encounter, her face paled. "She's testing us, David," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's trying to provoke a reaction. We have to be so careful. We discussed putting up "no trespassing" signs every 50 feet along our boundary, but decided against it for now. We didn't want to escalate the situation further, hoping that by remaining calm and adhering to the letter of the law, Patricia would eventually tire of her pointless crusade. We believed that kindness and reason would eventually win out. Despite the growing animosity, we tried to hold on to our values. Sarah, in particular, doubled down on her community outreach. We continued with our plans for the Harvest Festival, pouring our energy into organizing it. We sent out invitations, not just to our traditional farming neighbors, but to the residents of Willow Creek. We wanted to show them that our ranch wasn't just about cows and dirt. It was a place of warmth, tradition, and shared experience. We envisioned families laughing, children petting docile calves, and people enjoying fresh produce from our fields. It was an act of genuine good faith, an olive branch extended in the face of escalating hostility. Many of the Willow Creek residents responded positively, especially those young families who had visited before, like the Millers. They were excited at the prospect of a real farm experience. Their children, Owen and Lily, were particularly thrilled at the idea of seeing Hercules up close. Sarah even arranged for a small petting zoo section with gentle lambs and goat kids, and planned a hayride that would take visitors through a scenic part of the ranch, carefully avoiding the main cattle pastures where Hercules and the breeding herd grazed. We wanted to share the beauty and simplicity of our lives, to show them that despite our differences, we could coexist peacefully and even thrive together. We saw the Harvest Festival as an opportunity to change perceptions, to foster understanding and break down the invisible walls Patricia was trying to build. The day of the Harvest Festival arrived, bathed in glorious autumn sunshine. The air was crisp, scented with wood smoke and freshly cut hay. We had worked tirelessly, transforming a corner of our property into a welcoming festival ground. Local farmers set up stalls with pumpkins and gourds, artisans displayed handmade crafts, and the aroma of Sarah's famous apple cider wafted through the air. Children's laughter echoed across the fields as they ran around, their faces painted with farm animals. It was everything we had hoped for, a vibrant testament to community spirit and a testament to kindness. I saw the Millers arrive, Owen and Lily practically bouncing with excitement, pulling their parents towards the petting zoo. "Mr. Hayes! Mrs. Hayes!" Owen shouted, his face alight. "Can we see Hercules?" "Not today, buddy," I smiled, ruffling his hair. "Hercules is resting in his pasture. Maybe next time, when he's feeling more social." Sarah spent most of the day leading small groups of children, teaching them about the animals, patiently answering their endless questions. She glowed with genuine happiness, her passion for connecting people with the land evident in every word and gesture. It filled me with pride to see her, to see our ranch, bringing so much joy to others. It felt like we were finally breaking through the barrier of misunderstanding that Patricia had so carefully constructed. Even some of Patricia's allies, swayed by the festive atmosphere, seemed to relax. I saw Mrs. Henderson, a woman who usually kept to herself and was a known sympathizer of Patricia's strict views, actually smiling as she watched her grandchild ride a pony. It gave us a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, our simple act of hospitality was beginning to soften hearts and minds. Then, in the late afternoon, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Patricia Jenkins arrived. She didn't come alone. With her were two other HOA board members, dressed impeccably, their expressions grim and disapproving. They stood at the edge of the festival, their arms crossed, surveying the scene with an air of cold judgment that sucked the warmth out of the air. The laughter seemed to falter, conversations hushed, and a ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Patricia approached Sarah, her smile even thinner than usual. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice like ice, "this is quite the gathering. We weren't aware you planned to host a commercial event on your property. This clearly violates several HOA regulations regarding large public assemblages and commercial activities within the community boundaries." Sarah's smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "Ms. Jenkins, this isn't a commercial event. It's a community festival. We've invited our neighbors to share our harvest. It's a gift to the community." "A gift?" Patricia scoffed, her gaze sweeping over the stalls, lingering pointedly on the artisan who was selling small, handmade wooden toys. "It looks remarkably like a marketplace to me. And these community members are causing considerable traffic congestion on our private roads. Furthermore," she paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked towards the petting zoo, "we've received complaints about the proximity of livestock to residential areas. And, if I'm not mistaken, I saw some children attempting to pet large animals. This is a severe safety hazard." "The animals are supervised, Ms. Jenkins," Sarah retorted, her voice firm. "And they're perfectly safe. This festival is about bringing people together, about showing kindness, not about causing problems." "Kindness doesn't supersede bylaws, Mrs. Hayes," Patricia said, her voice rising slightly. "You are clearly in violation. We will be issuing a formal notice and significant fines for these infractions. And I must insist you shut this down immediately." A stunned silence fell over the festival grounds. The music stopped. Children looked up, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. The joy that had filled the air moments before evaporated, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Patricia had expertly, ruthlessly, pulled the rug out from under us, turning an act of goodwill into a weapon against us. Her gaze, cold and triumphant, held Sarah's. It was a public humiliation, a deliberate act of cruelty designed to undermine our efforts to connect with the community. But Patricia wasn't finished. As she turned to leave, her eyes fell upon a group of teenagers, giggling and pointing towards the main pasture where Hercules and the herd were grazing peacefully. A few of them, curious and emboldened by the festive atmosphere, had climbed onto a lower section of the sturdy, old wooden fence, trying to get a better look at the massive bull. Our ranch hands were circulating, gently reminding people to keep a safe distance, but teenagers, as they often do, sometimes pushed boundaries. Patricia's face hardened. She marched over to them, her voice sharp. "Youngsters! Get down from there immediately. This is private property. And that animal is highly dangerous. Are you trying to get yourselves hurt?" She turned back to us, her voice booming now, loud enough for half the festival to hear. "Mr. Hayes. Mrs. Hayes. This is precisely the kind of unsupervised, dangerous activity that your festival encourages. This is completely unacceptable. We cannot have people, especially children, freely approaching your livestock." Before I could even respond, before I could explain that the kids were being watched, that Hercules was the gentlest bull imaginable, Patricia, without another word, made a swift, decisive move. She turned to one of the HOA board members with her and, pointing towards the main gate leading into our vast pastures, a gate that was usually kept securely locked, she issued a chilling command. "Mr. Peterson, I want that gate opened. We need to put up clear signage about restricted areas and ensure these animals are properly secured, away from public view. This is a clear breach of safety protocol. We must ensure the community is safe, even if it means taking proactive measures ourselves." My blood ran cold. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Ms. Jenkins! You can't!" I shouted, sprinting towards her. "That's a private gate. You have no right to open it." But it was too late. Mr. Peterson, perhaps intimidated by Patricia's authority, or genuinely believing he was acting for safety, had already approached the gate. With a click, the heavy chain that secured it swung open, revealing the wide, green expanse of our south pasture, the very pasture where Hercules and the main breeding herd were quietly grazing. The gate stood agape, an open invitation to anyone who might wander in, or, terrifyingly, to anyone Patricia might choose to let in. A cold dread, a premonition of disaster, settled deep in my bones. The sight of the pasture gate swinging open, unlatched by Mr. Peterson at Patricia's cold command, sent a jolt of pure panic through me. My gut clenched, and a primal alarm screamed in my head. That gate was always locked, a sacred barrier protecting our animals, our privacy, our very livelihood. Now, it stood open, a gaping mouth inviting trouble. I broke into a desperate run, shouting, "No! Stop! You don't understand the danger." Sarah, who had been confronting Patricia, instantly grasped the gravity of the situation. Her face, usually so calm and composed, twisted with horror as she too started to sprint towards the open gate. The few ranch hands we had helping with the festival, seeing our alarm, also rushed forward, their eyes wide with concern. But Patricia just stood there, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips, watching the chaos unfold. Mr. Peterson, looking a little uncertain now, just stood by the open gate, holding the chain loosely. "This is completely unacceptable, Miss Jenkins," I yelled, my voice hoarse with fury and fear. "You have no right to open that gate. This is private property. This is dangerous." Patricia just raised an eyebrow, a picture of false calm. "I am simply ensuring the safety of the community, Mr. Hayes. Your unsecured animals are a liability. If they were to wander out..." Her gaze drifted pointedly towards the teenagers who had been on the fence, then towards the nearby homes of Willow Creek. It was a calculated performance, designed to make it seem like she was the responsible one, and we were the negligent, dangerous ranchers. The festival guests, a moment ago caught in the festive spirit, now watched in a stunned silence. They saw the confrontation, the open gate, and the growing tension. Some looked bewildered, others seemed to side with Patricia, nodding along to her spiel about safety. But a few, like the Millers, looked genuinely appalled, their concern etched on their faces. Meanwhile, in the pasture, Hercules, sensing the sudden shift in the air, lifted his massive head, his intelligent eyes scanning the open gate and the flurry of human activity. He was a curious, gentle giant, but a bull of his size could be unpredictable if startled or if his herd felt threatened. He began to slowly move towards the opening, a picture of majestic power. "Hercules! Stay!" I bellowed, a futile command carried on the wind. Just as I reached the gate, breathless and fuming, Mr. Peterson, clearly flustered by my approach and Patricia's stern presence, fumbled with the chain, trying to close it. But in his haste, he dropped it, and the gate swung wider. It was then that a small boy, no older than 7, who had wandered off from his parents and was drawn by the excitement, decided to seize the opportunity. He darted past Mr. Peterson, a joyful cry escaping his lips, intending to get a closer look at the majestic white bull. "Timmy, no!" A woman's horrified shriek cut through the air. My heart leaped into my throat. Hercules was calm, but a child running directly towards a 2,000-pound animal was a disaster waiting to happen. Before any of us could react, Sarah, with the swiftness and courage that always defined her, launched herself forward. She tackled the boy, pulling him back from the open gate just as Hercules, startled by the sudden movement, let out a deep, resonant bellow that vibrated through the ground. He didn't charge, but he stomped a hoof, a clear sign of agitation. Patricia, seeing this near miss, seized the moment. "See," she shrieked, her voice shrill with manufactured outrage. "See the danger? This is exactly what we were trying to prevent. Your animals are a menace." She turned to the onlookers, her voice echoing with drama. "We simply cannot allow such a risk to our children." The fear that had gripped me was replaced by a cold, burning fury. "You created this risk, Ms. Jenkins," I roared, standing squarely in front of the open gate, my arms spread wide. "You opened my private gate without permission. You put that child in danger." I was acting on behalf of the HOA, Mr. Hayes, for community safety, she retorted, her eyes blazing with indignation. You are clearly too irresponsible to manage your own property. The argument raged for several more minutes, a public spectacle that completely overshadowed the festival. Most of the guests, clearly uncomfortable, began to pack up, their brief moment of joy shattered. It was a complete disaster. The Harvest Festival, meant to be a bridge of understanding, had been deliberately torched by Patricia. She achieved her goal. Not only did she embarrass us publicly and threaten us with fines, but she made our ranch seem like a dangerous, unruly place. She sowed seeds of fear and distrust, reinforcing the narrative that we were a threat to their pristine, ordered community. After everyone had left, and the last of the disappointed festival-goers drove away, leaving behind only the scattered remnants of our hopeful event, Sarah and I stood in the quiet, desolate field. The sun had set, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, but the beauty of the evening was lost on us. We were exhausted, defeated, and profoundly saddened. She won, David, Sarah whispered, her voice heavy with despair as she leaned against me. She poisoned everything. How can we ever get them to understand now? We're not giving up, Sarah, I said, my jaw tight. This is our home. Our legacy. We'll find a way to fight her. We spent the rest of the evening securing every single gate, reinforcing every latch, and planning out new strategies with Brenda, our lawyer. The random compliance checks suddenly felt far more menacing. We knew Patricia was escalating, becoming bolder, and that her actions were no longer just about bylaws, they were personal. The next few months were a blur of legal letters, heated HOA meetings where Patricia seemed to gain more power, and constant, subtle harassment. We'd find new, anonymous complaints in our mailbox, about the noise of our tractor, the smell of our silage, even the stray hairs from our horses floating into their immaculate yards. Each complaint, however minor, came with a threat of a fine. We felt like we were living under a microscope, every move scrutinized, every sound amplified, every natural part of ranch life twisted into an infraction. We tightened our security, installed more cameras, and even trained our loyal ranch dog, Buster, to be more vigilant, though he was naturally a gentle giant who preferred belly rubs to barking. One afternoon, a few weeks after the disastrous festival, I was driving the tractor, spreading fresh feed in the north pasture. It was a peaceful, rhythmic task, the low rumble of the engine a familiar comfort. The weather had been unseasonably warm, a golden Indian summer that made the grass lush and green. As I made a wide turn, I saw something that made me cut the engine immediately. My breath caught in my throat. There, walking slowly across the far end of the pasture, near the creek bed that bordered the Willow Creek development, were two figures. They weren't ranch hands, nor were they any of our usual visitors. They were dressed in bright, almost fluorescent hunting vests, carrying what looked like long, dark rifles. They were clearly on our property, brazenly trespassing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Hunting was strictly prohibited on our land, especially near the livestock. And these weren't deer hunters, the type of rifles they carried seemed too large for small game. My mind raced. Was this a new, compliance check, from Patricia? Had she finally dared to send people onto our land? I killed the engine and watched, my anger boiling. They were moving purposefully, their eyes scanning the landscape, occasionally pointing towards the distant tree line. They seemed to be searching for something, or perhaps just surveying. Their presence felt like an extreme violation, a blatant disregard for our privacy and safety. I wanted to storm over there, confront them, demand to know what they were doing. But then I remembered Sarah's words, "Be careful, David." I needed to act smart, not just react. I quickly pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the keys, and called Sarah. "Honey, you won't believe this," I whispered, my voice tight with controlled fury. "There are two guys, dressed in hunting gear, with rifles, walking on the far end of the north pasture right now. They're trespassing." "What?" Sarah's voice was sharp with alarm. Are you sure? Call the sheriff, David. Immediately. I will, I promised, my eyes still fixed on the figures. But I want to see what they're doing first. I don't want to spook them. I want proof. I knew it was risky, but a part of me, fueled by a growing sense of persecution, wanted to catch them in the act, to definitively prove Patricia's increasingly aggressive tactics. I watched them for a few more tense minutes. They didn't seem to be hunting, not in the traditional sense. They were just walking, looking, almost inspecting the land. It was baffling and deeply unsettling. Were they scouting? Planning something? The possibilities churned in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, disappearing into the dense brush near the creek bed that led back towards the Willow Creek side. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, how to enter and exit our property unseen. I immediately called the sheriff, detailing what I saw. Sheriff Miller, a gruff but fair man who knew our family well, promised to send a deputy to investigate. By the time Deputy Jones arrived an hour later, there was no trace of the trespassers, only their footprints in the soft mud by the creek. Deputy Jones took notes, expressed his concern, and promised to keep an eye out, but without a clear description or any direct evidence of them doing anything illegal other than trespassing, his hands were tied. He suggested that if I saw them again, should immediately call 911 and try to get photos, but from a safe distance. The incident gnawed at me. It felt like a direct consequence of Patricia's actions, her open gate, her aggressive, compliance checks. It was as if she had paved the way for something far more sinister. The idea that strangers, armed and with unknown intentions, were freely walking on our land, a place where our animals grazed and our family lived, was a terrifying thought. It was a glaring, extreme breach of our security, a sign that the boundaries Patricia had so carelessly blurred were now gone entirely. We felt truly exposed, and the chilling premonition that something terrible was about to happen grew stronger with each passing day. The very air around the ranch felt charged with a quiet menace, a suspenseful dread. We had managed to survive the financial hardships, the natural disasters, even the public humiliations. But this was different. This felt like a deliberate, personal attack, and we knew, with a certainty that chilled us to the bone, that the next, extreme event would be far more devastating than anything we had faced before. The sight of those armed trespassers on our pasture, combined with Patricia Jenkins's escalating tactics, left us with a deep, unsettling fear. The incident haunted my thoughts. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking figure, every unfamiliar sound made me jump. Sarah and I spent restless nights discussing what to do, how to protect our land and our animals from an enemy that seemed to hide in plain sight, an enemy we suspected was being quietly enabled by the very people who were supposed to be our neighbors. We increased our vigilance, checking the fences multiple times a day, and even installed more discreet cameras around the property, hoping to catch any future incursions. The ranch, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like a fortress under siege. Life on the ranch, despite the underlying tension, continued with its own rhythms. The cows still needed milking, the fields still needed tending, and the endless cycle of feeding and care never stopped. These routines were a comfort, a grounding force in the face of the encroaching uncertainty. We found solace in the simple moments, watching the calves chase each other in the morning sun, or sharing a quiet cup of coffee on the porch as the mist lifted over the distant hills. These moments reminded us why we fought so hard, for this way of life, for the beauty and honesty of working the land. One afternoon, a few weeks after the sighting of the armed men, Sarah and I were out inspecting the herd. Hercules, our magnificent bull, was grazing peacefully with the cows, his massive white form a beacon of calm in the green pasture. He was truly a gentle giant, a testament to Sarah's unwavering kindness and dedication. He would often approach us, nudging our hands for a scratch behind his ears, his intelligent eyes reflecting the quiet dignity of his nature. As we walked, we noticed something unusual near the far end of the pasture, close to the Willow Creek boundary. It was a new gate, a small, hastily constructed wooden one, clearly not part of our fencing. It looked flimsy, barely secured. My heart sank. This wasn't just trespassing. This was a deliberate act, an attempt to create a permanent point of entry onto our land. It was almost mocking in its blatant disregard for our property. "David, look," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, pointing a trembling finger. "Someone put this here. They're making a path." I knelt, examining the rough-cut timber and cheap hinges. There were fresh footprints around it, a mixture of heavy boots and the smaller, refined shoe print I remembered seeing near the old gate at the Harvest Festival. The same type of shoe print I would later find near Hercules. A cold, bitter anger surged through me. This was methodical. This was planned. "They're getting bolder," I said, my voice low and tight. "They're practically building a road into our ranch." We immediately removed the makeshift gate, dismantling it and reinforcing the original fence line with extra wire and new posts. We also moved one of our new security cameras to specifically monitor that section of the fence, hoping to catch the perpetrators in the act next time. The act of building the gate was a less extreme event, an annoyance and a trespass, but it hinted at something far more sinister brewing beneath the surface. It showed a deliberate intent to violate our space, to make our ranch accessible to outsiders for unknown purposes. The next HOA meeting was a battlefield. We went in prepared, armed with photographs of the makeshift gate and a detailed account of the armed trespassers. We laid out our concerns, emphasizing the danger this posed, not just to our livestock, but to the entire community if unauthorized people were freely entering the area. We appealed to their sense of reason, their desire for true safety. Patricia, however, was ready for us. She dismissed our claims, calling them exaggerated and paranoid. She spun a narrative that we were simply trying to avoid proper community oversight, and that our large, unpredictable animals were the real threat. She even had a few residents, clearly coached, stand up and complain about suspicious activity on our ranch, implying that we were the cause of the problem, not the victims. They spoke of loud noises late at night, likely coyotes, a natural part of ranch life, and strange lights, our floodlights, for nighttime barn work. It was a masterful manipulation, turning the narrative completely on its head. "Perhaps, Mr. Hayes," Patricia said, her voice sickly sweet, "if your property were more open to authorized inspections, these misunderstandings wouldn't occur. We are, after all, simply trying to protect property values and ensure everyone's safety." She glanced pointedly at the residents who had spoken, a subtle nod of approval. We left the meeting feeling utterly defeated. It was clear that Patricia had cemented her power. The majority of the residents, either swayed by her rhetoric or simply afraid to challenge her, blindly followed her lead. We were isolated, demonized, and increasingly vulnerable. We realized that appealing to reason wouldn't work. We were up against a force driven by control and an almost irrational dislike for our way of life. It felt like we were alone in a vast, uncaring world. Despite the heavy weight on our shoulders, we tried to find moments of joy and connection. We reached out to our traditional ranching neighbors, the ones who had known us for decades. They understood our plight and offered quiet support, bringing us casseroles and words of encouragement. Mrs. Miller, from Willow Creek, would often leave little notes of kindness in our mailbox, offering a brief moment of warmth amidst the coldness. She even brought over a batch of freshly baked cookies for Sarah one afternoon, her eyes full of unspoken sympathy. "Don't let them get to you, Sarah," she'd whispered, a genuine friend in an increasingly hostile environment. These small acts of solidarity, these quiet gestures of empathy, became our lifelines, reminding us that there were still good people, people who understood what truly mattered. They were the gentle breezes in a gathering storm. But the storm was indeed gathering, and it showed no signs of passing. Patricia's campaign of harassment intensified. We started receiving daily complaints, sometimes multiple times a day, about the most trivial things. A loose bale of hay, a tractor parked too close to the property line, the sound of the cattle at dawn. Each complaint was accompanied by a threat of escalating fines, designed to wear us down, to bleed us dry financially. We were forced to spend countless hours documenting everything, sending meticulously worded rebuttals to the HOA, and consulting with Brenda on every new absurdity. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and financially crippling. The joy of ranching was slowly being suffocated by the endless bureaucracy and petty malice. One chilly evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows across the fields, I was doing my final check of the pastures. The air was still, quiet, broken only by the gentle lowing of the herd. As I approached the south pasture, the one where Hercules often grazed, I noticed something profoundly disturbing. The sturdy, high-tensile wire fence that separated our land from the Willow Creek development, a fence I had personally checked that very morning, had been cut. Not just a section, but a wide, gaping hole, almost perfectly circular, as if made by a specialized tool. It wasn't a tear from an animal, or a break from wear and tear. This was deliberate. A clean, precise cut. My heart dropped into my stomach like a stone. And through the opening, I saw fresh tracks in the soft earth. Several sets of them. Not just human footprints, but what looked like faint, parallel lines, as if something heavy had been dragged through the gap. My mind immediately flashed back to the armed trespassers, to the makeshift gate, to Patricia's smug threats. This wasn't about compliance checks or safety anymore. This was a direct, malicious act. It was an extreme violation, a terrifying escalation beyond anything we had faced before. Someone had deliberately breached our perimeter, not just to walk through, but to create a permanent, easy access point into the very heart of our ranch. It was an open wound in our defenses, a chilling invitation to disaster. The sheer audacity of it, the cold intent, made my blood run cold. We were no longer dealing with petty squabbles. This was an outright act of sabotage, a clear sign that our ranch was now a target for something far more sinister and dangerous. The next morning, as I awoke, a terrible feeling of foreboding hung in the air, a silent scream of impending doom. The sight of the cut fence, the clean, deliberate severance of the wires, sent a shiver of dread down my spine that even the warm morning sun couldn't dissipate. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a declaration. Someone had breached our last line of defense, not just to sneak in, but to leave a wide-open wound. My mind raced back to the armed trespassers, the makeshift gate, and Patricia's relentless campaign against us. This felt like the culmination of all those veiled threats and subtle aggressions. Sarah arrived, her face paling as she saw the damage. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "They cut it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They really cut it. David, what does this mean?" "It means they want access," I replied, my voice grim, "and they're not asking politely anymore." We immediately called Sheriff Miller, who dispatched Deputy Jones. He arrived quickly, his expression serious as he surveyed the deliberate damage. He confirmed our suspicions, this wasn't accidental. The cuts were precise, clearly made with heavy-duty wire cutters. He took photos, dusted for prints, though he held little hope of finding anything useful on the rough terrain, and promised to increase patrols in the area, but his hands were largely tied. Without a direct witness or clear perpetrator, it was just property damage. "We'll do what we can, David," Deputy Jones said, his gaze apologetic. "But it's tough when someone's being this deliberate and careful." After the deputy left, Sarah and I worked tirelessly to repair the fence. We used even stronger wire, reinforcing it with extra posts and cementing them deeper into the ground. We moved more cameras, aiming them directly at the repaired section, hoping to catch the next attempt. We even considered getting a guard dog, a more aggressive breed than our friendly Buster, but the thought of bringing that kind of tension onto the ranch, and potentially harming an innocent person, troubled Sarah deeply. "We can't let them change who we are, David," she'd insisted. "We fight with integrity." Despite the intensified security measures, a constant, gnawing anxiety settled over the ranch. Every creak of the floorboards at night, every distant sound, made us tense. Sarah, usually so full of boundless energy, began to look tired, dark circles under her eyes. The joy she once found in her daily tasks was dimmed by the pervasive worry. It felt like we were living under a dark cloud, waiting for the lightning to strike. This constant state of low-level fear, this psychological toll, was a less extreme event in itself, but its cumulative effect was profound, draining our spirits and making us question how much longer we could endure. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, a strange package arrived at our doorstep. It was a plain, unmarked brown box, taped shut with heavy-duty packing tape. There was no return address, just our ranch address sloppily scrawled on the front. A cold prickle of unease ran down my spine. We rarely received packages, and the anonymous nature of this one immediately set off alarm bells. "What is it, David?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with apprehension as she watched me pick it up. It felt light, almost empty, but there was a faint, metallic rattling sound from inside. I carefully cut open the tape, my fingers fumbling slightly. Inside, nestled on a bed of crumpled newspaper, were several items. My heart pounded as I pulled them out, one by one. First, a small, crudely drawn cartoon of Hercules, drawn with angry, red eyes, and excess over his eyes, as if dead. Underneath it, someone had scrawled in blocky letters, "Problem animal." Next, a torn, mud-stained piece of paper, clearly ripped from an official-looking document, with only a few words visible: "Permit denied, unauthorized access." But the most chilling item was a single, spent rifle casing, gleaming dully in the fading light. It was a large caliber, the kind used for big game hunting, or perhaps, something worse. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, David," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at the casing. "What does this mean?" "It's a threat," I said, my voice barely a whisper, the blood draining from my face. "A very clear threat." The message was unmistakable: they had been on our land, they had targeted Hercules, and they were letting us know they weren't afraid to act. This was an extreme event, a direct, terrifying communication from our unseen tormentors, confirming our worst fears. It wasn't just property damage anymore, it felt like a warning of violence. We immediately called the sheriff again, but without fingerprints or any direct link to a suspect. The package, while deeply disturbing, provided little concrete evidence for law enforcement to act on. Deputy Jones noted our concerns and promised to be extra vigilant in his patrols. He even suggested we install a full gate at our property entrance, one that was fully automated and less accessible to tampering, something we immediately began looking into. Days bled into weeks, each one a tightrope walk between the demands of ranch life and the crushing weight of paranoia. We tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Buster, who seemed to sense our distress, often nudging his head into our hands as if offering comfort. Our loyal ranch hands, some of whom had worked for my family for decades, noticed our heightened anxiety. They offered their support, quietly reinforcing fences and keeping an extra eye on the herd, their unspoken loyalty a source of strength. These were the true members of our community, the ones who understood that the land and its creatures were not just property, but family. The tension continued to mount. Every time a car slowed down on the road bordering our property, every distant barking dog, every unexplained shadow, sent a jolt of fear through us. Sarah, in an attempt to protect Hercules, started bringing him into the closest, most secure pasture at night, right next to the barn, despite the extra effort it required. She'd spend extra time with him, brushing his magnificent coat, whispering words of reassurance into his ear, as if trying to shield him from the unseen malice that hovered over our land. Her empathy for him was profound, a reflection of the deep bond they shared. Then came the calls. Anonymous, hang up calls in the middle of the night. Whispering voices threatening vague consequences if we didn't clean up our act. Each call left us shaken, our sleep fractured, our nerves frayed. Brenda, our lawyer, advised us to report every single one to the police, to keep a detailed log, and to consider getting a restraining order if we could identify the source, but it was impossible to trace the calls. It was another tactic of psychological warfare, designed to break us down slowly, to make us feel vulnerable and alone. The phone, once a connection to friends and suppliers, now felt like a conduit for fear. One morning, just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky with streaks of pink and gold, I was out checking on a new batch of calves. The air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and fresh hay. As I made my way towards the barn, I saw Sarah standing frozen at the edge of the south pasture, her back to me. Her shoulders were hunched, and her entire body seemed to be trembling. A cold dread, far worse than any I had felt before, gripped me. The image of the cut fence, the chilling anonymous package, the armed trespassers, all of it flashed through my mind. This was it. The climax of our mounting dread. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper, afraid of what I would see. She didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any scream. As I got closer, I saw her hands were clutched to her mouth, her knuckles white. Her gaze was fixed on something in the dew-kissed grass, something lying perfectly still. My blood ran cold. The scene was sickeningly familiar, a nightmare come to life. And then I saw the spreading crimson stain, stark against the brilliant white. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself forward, knowing, with a horrible certainty, what awaited me. It was Hercules, our gentle giant, our symbol of hope, lying lifeless. A jagged, dark hole marred his perfect hide. The ultimate act of malice, the final, most extreme violation had occurred. The silence of the morning was shattered by the unspoken horror of what had been done, a wound not just to our land, but to our very souls. The lifeless form of Hercules, stained crimson against the dew-kissed grass, was a sight that seared itself into my memory, a wound that would never fully heal. Sarah's choked sobs tore through the morning, a raw sound of grief that echoed the emptiness in my own chest. Our magnificent bull, a creature of boundless gentleness and a symbol of our resilience, was gone. Murdered. The horror of it was overwhelming, a tidal wave of anguish and fury. I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his still warm hide, the warmth quickly fading, replaced by a chilling stillness. The clean, jagged bullet hole behind his shoulder spoke of cold, calculated intent. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution. My eyes, blurred by unshed tears, scanned the ground. The muddy boot print was there, distinct and unmistakable, larger than any boot I owned or my ranch hands wore. And right beside it, undeniably, was the small, pristine print of a woman's polished shoe, the same kind I had seen near the makeshift gate, the same kind Patricia Jenkins wore. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a rage so potent it threatened to consume me. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a direct consequence of Patricia's actions, her open gates, her compliance checks, her absolute disregard for our boundaries. "They did this, David," Sarah whispered, her voice raw with agony, her face buried in Hercules's thick, white fur. "They came onto our land and they killed him. My Hercules." I clenched my fists, my knuckles white. "I know, honey. And we're going to find out who." Sheriff Miller arrived quickly, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. He'd known Hercules, had admired him at local fairs. His usual gruff demeanor was replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. "This is beyond property damage, David," he said, his voice low. "This is animal cruelty. Felony animal cruelty. We'll find them." He and his deputies spent hours meticulously searching the area, taking photographs, collecting samples, and even finding a second spent rifle casing. He assured us they would send it for ballistic analysis and dust for prints, but the feeling of utter violation lingered. The ranch felt tainted, its peace shattered beyond repair. The investigation began immediately, but progress was painfully slow. The sheriff's office followed up on leads, questioned local hunters, and even discreetly interviewed some of the Willow Creek residents. Everyone expressed shock, but no one seemed to have seen anything. Patricia Jenkins, when questioned, feigned outrage, condemning the senseless act and reiterating her concern for community safety, even going so far as to suggest we were somehow responsible for allowing dangerous elements onto our property. Her crocodile tears were infuriating. The emotional toll on Sarah was devastating. Hercules had been more than just a bull, he was her special project, a symbol of hope and resilience. She spent her days walking the pastures, her eyes scanning the horizon, a deep sadness etched onto her face. Her boundless energy waned, replaced by a quiet, almost haunted stillness. I tried to comfort her, but my own heart was heavy with grief and a burning desire for justice. The ranch, once a vibrant hub of life, felt eerily quiet without Hercules's massive presence. The other cattle seemed subdued, their lowing softer, as if they too mourned his loss. We continued with our routines, but the joy was gone, replaced by a grim determination. We knew, deep in our hearts, that Patricia was involved, somehow. Her repeated threats, her escalating intrusions, her very public declaration of our ranch as a danger, it all pointed to her. But we had no concrete proof, just an agonizing conviction. One particularly gray afternoon, a few weeks after Hercules's death, Sarah received a phone call. I heard her gasp, then her voice grew tight with controlled fury. "How dare you?" she spat into the phone, her hand trembling. "You had no right. You are a monster." She slammed the receiver down, her chest heaving. "What is it, honey?" I asked, rushing to her side. "Patricia," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "She called me. She said she knew about Hercules. She said it was regrettable, but necessary to maintain order and ensure safety. She said, some sacrifices must be made for the greater good of the community. She implied she knows who did it, and that she approves." A cold wave of shock, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated fury, washed over me. This was it. This was the admission, veiled though it was. She was taunting us, reveling in our pain. This was a clear, undeniable link. I immediately called Sheriff Miller, relaying Sarah's distraught account. He listened gravely. "That's not enough for an arrest, David," he said, his voice regretful. "But it's motive. It helps build a picture. We need more." The next week was a blur of heightened tension. We were certain Patricia would make another move. We reinforced our security, watched our land with renewed vigilance, and kept our phones close. The Millers, our kind neighbors from Willow Creek, reached out again, their eyes full of sympathy. "We're so sorry about Hercules," Mrs. Miller whispered when she saw Sarah. It's terrible. Everyone's talking about it." Her hushed tone suggested more than just polite concern. It hinted at whispers, at suspicions, circulating beneath Patricia's carefully constructed facade. And then, a new set of clues began to emerge, not from official investigations, but from the quiet acts of kindness and observation within the community itself. Old Mr. Henderson, the wise, quiet neighbor who had known my family for generations, called me late one night. "David," he said, his voice low, "I didn't want to get involved, but, a few weeks ago, before Hercules, before all this, I saw two men. Carrying rifles. Coming out of the woods near the Willow Creek border. And I saw Patricia Jenkins's car, parked discreetly on a dirt track not far from where they emerged. They got in her car. She drove them away." His voice was heavy with conviction. I didn't think much of it then, figured it was just her trying to be helpful, maybe for some animal control thing. But now I'm thinking. He was a man of integrity, and his testimony, though circumstantial, was a vital piece of the puzzle. It placed Patricia at the scene, acting as a getaway driver for armed men on our property, just days before Hercules was killed. Then came another unexpected turn. A few days later, a young, shy man named Kevin, who worked part-time at the local hardware store and had delivered supplies to us many times, nervously approached me. He spoke in hushed tones, almost afraid to be overheard. "Mr. Hayes," he stammered, I know this might sound strange, but a while back, a man came into the store. A really big guy, wore a polo shirt. He bought heavy-duty wire cutters. And a specific type of rifle ammunition. And he paid with a credit card. Patricia Jenkins's credit card. Kevin looked around nervously, lowering his voice even further. He said he was doing a special project for the HOA. My heart leaped into my throat. The image of the burly man with the clipboard, standing next to Patricia at our fence line, flashed through my mind. He was the Mr. Peterson she had ordered to open our gate during the festival. A powerful, chilling realization hit me. This wasn't just a threat, it was a conspiracy. Patricia hadn't just enabled it, she had orchestrated it, perhaps hired these men, provided them with the means to trespass and commit this horrific act. The rifle casing, the cut fence, the armed men, Patricia's car, her credit card, the pieces were finally starting to fit. I immediately relayed this new information, carefully and calmly, to Sheriff Miller. He listened intently, his eyes narrowing. "Okay, David," he said, a new edge of determination in his voice. "This is what we needed. This gives us probable cause. I'm bringing Patricia Jenkins in for questioning. And we're going to get a warrant to search her property." The climax of our long nightmare arrived swiftly. Sheriff Miller and a team of deputies arrived at Patricia Jenkins's pristine suburban house. The ensuing scene was a maelstrom of flashing lights, raised voices, and stunned neighbors peeking through their curtains. Patricia, initially defiant and haughty, crumpled under the weight of the direct questioning and the evidence accumulating against her. The ballistics report on the rifle casing from our pasture matched one of the rifles found during the search of a shed on her property, cleverly hidden amongst gardening tools. The same shed where investigators found a muddy boot with the distinct tread I'd described, and a pair of pristine, polished women's shoes with the exact print found near Hercules. They also found the heavy-duty wire cutters, with traces of our fence wire still clinging to the blades. It was all there, damning and undeniable. Under intense questioning, and faced with overwhelming evidence, Patricia finally broke. Not with an apology or remorse, but with a torrent of self-serving justification. She confessed to orchestrating the entire plan. She admitted to hiring the two men, local, down-on-their-luck hunters she'd manipulated with promises of money and the twisted idea of community service, to scare us, to force us off our land, to make our ranch comply with her vision of the perfect suburban utopia. She had convinced them that Hercules was a dangerous nuisance, and that removing him was a necessary evil. She saw our ranch, with its working animals and natural untidiness, as a blight on her perfectly ordered community, a direct threat to the property values she so obsessively worshipped. She admitted to driving the men, to supplying the tools, to planning the breaches. She confessed that Hercules's death was meant to be the final, terrifying straw, to break us completely and force us to sell. She believed she was acting for the greater good. The news ripped through Willow Creek like wildfire. The residents were stunned, some horrified, others deeply ashamed. The Millers came to us, tears in their eyes, offering apologies on behalf of the community. "We should have seen it, David," Mrs. Miller choked out. "We should have stood up to her sooner." Mr. Henderson quietly brought us a homemade pie, his eyes filled with sorrow and a shared sense of vindication. Kindness, once suffocated by fear, began to tentatively re-emerge. Patricia Jenkins was arrested and charged with felony animal cruelty, conspiracy, and multiple counts of trespassing and property damage. The evidence was overwhelming, and the community, no longer under her oppressive sway, largely turned against her. Her fall from grace was swift and absolute. The legal process would be long, but we knew justice, in some form, would be served. The ranch, however, would never be the same. The loss of Hercules left a gaping hole in our hearts, a wound that time would slowly scar but never fully erase. His memory became a silent testament to the fragile line between community and control, between empathy and obsession. We rebuilt the fence even stronger, installed an automated gate, and significantly upgraded our security. But more importantly, we rebuilt our resolve. We learned that true kindness and empathy must be fiercely protected, not just practiced. We had seen the darkness that could lurk beneath a veneer of order, and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. Our ranch became a symbol not just of our fight, but of our endurance. We continued to operate, stronger and more determined than ever, our commitment to our way of life deepened by the ordeal. We worked closely with Sheriff Miller and local community leaders to establish new guidelines, ensuring that no HOA could ever again wield such destructive power over private landowners. We even started a foundation in Hercules' name, dedicated to promoting humane animal treatment and protecting the rights of rural landowners from encroaching, overreaching regulations. Life on the Triple Creek Ranch would always carry the memory of Hercules and the brutal lesson we learned. But as time passed, the quiet rhythms of the land began to heal us, just as Sarah had once healed a sickly calf. The sun still rose over our pastures, the cattle still grazed peacefully, and the wind still whispered through the cottonwood trees. We had lost a part of our heart, but we had saved our home, our legacy, and our very way of life, forged in the fires of adversity and forever marked by the ultimate act of malice by an HOA Karen who let strangers onto our ranch, and shot our $50,000 bull.